enhance. I think you go from 6.5 FTEs in schools to 13, so you're going to be doubling the FTEs. So you should certainly be able to double the work and the cleanliness.
That'd be nice.
We have, cleaning here 2 nights a week in the town hall. All snow shoveling is done by Steve Pajemski and John Mativier. So, I'm sure they can't wait to see this happen. The police shovel their own driveways and walkways anyway. Peter will run the plow around, but they don't get out of the truck and do any hand shoveling.
Right.
So it's going to be, and I'll no longer be the maintenance man. I have a little toolkit in my office, and if something's broken, I get to fix it if I can, or somebody else tries. So we've been getting by, but the whole town's been
We've all been getting by. Barely.
Yeah.
Mike, I have a question on the sheet in regards to the preventative maintenance. To back up to the question about the extraordinary things, do we think that this preventative maintenance now is going to exceed what we're doing at this point in time? So therefore, these large, unforeseen, larger projects, we can actually look ahead and do some preventative maintenance, as not wait for things to break to fix, but we'll actually be able to have a better handle on it.
Quarterly inspection
Absolutely.
things that you mentioned?
I mean, as opposed to just sitting really waiting for something to break, because you don't have anyone to look at it. But now, before the boiler goes, it's like, hey, let's get someone in for a couple thousand before you always have to spend 100,000.
And I would probably say yes and no. I think absolutely, that's absolutely correct for the mechanical, the HVAC.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and what is one of
Some
the
of this
things.
stuff's just so old.
It's just-
It's
Well,
just
There's no doubt. I'm just asking, is this going to bring it up a couple of notches where it is?
Will no question bring it up. I would say maybe even more than a couple of notches. The problem is some of those things that are outside, okay, the HVAC and mechanical and electrical.
Yeah.
Okay, and of course, one of the things that we all know right now, and hopefully eventually at some point in time we deal with it through a capital replacement, but the high school roof, we currently pay for a maintenance contract to come in twice a year, inspect it and patch leaks, but conceivably you have other things that will happen.
How much is that contract, Terry?
The contract's about $7,500. But if there are leaks or something that happen in between there, albeit it's a reduced rate because we have the contract, it's still an additional expense.
Yeah.
Every year, right?
It's happened less since we've had that contract.
Right,
This is our
which is
second
why
year
we
of the
went into the
contract.
contract, right?
Yeah, so it certainly happened less. We don't have such a contract for Pearlie or Pembroke. Of course, we all remember that we've had 200-year floods in the last 4 years. None of that really is, that's clearly one of those extraordinary things. So there are some things like that we still, right now, we still need to flesh out how that's going to be addressed.
Right.
Okay, but I absolutely agree with Sandy and Mike that from the electrical, mechanical, HVAC stuff, the preventive maintenance will clearly improve that immensely.
And Mike, your the cost, the estimated budget. So you did that off the square feet with the company. Is that what you did to get the 554?
Yes, and they admittedly said that's fat.
Right.
Because
They said it's
They're
what?
They're not going to go low on their
It's
estimate.
This is
high.
not going to be a bid price.
Oh.
This is going to be higher than what a bid price
It's a
would be.
budgeted, anytime especially when we're looking for so we know how much to budget or go to the CIP and say, how much is it going to cost to paint this building? We'll go out and just get a single bid and somebody will, just pull a round number out. And then, because they're going to want to bid on it. So they're going to give us a high number, first of all, and then
Yeah, no, absolutely.
and then, hopefully bid under that so they get the job.
Yeah, I noticed in the RFP that Whitman Hanson did as one of the job responsibilities, or one of the items that could be asked of the workers was painting. They had that written right in there, that painting was one of the things that was expected as part of the job responsibilities. I mean, obviously, it's not like the whole school necessarily, but it's just interesting, you know, how different people, you know, spin it.
Mike, I have a question for you. Do we have a sense of if we did this in-house with all the way we're doing it today and added this extra staff, there's a built-in profit margin that this private company has to make. My question to you is, do you have a sense of what the savings and the efficiency would be? I think the effectiveness is hard to kind of quantify at this point, because if we had the same staff doing it, we'd probably have the same, we'd hope we'd have the same result.
Right.
I guess my question is, let's assume all these FTEs are town of Georgetown employees for the moment. Do we, I mean, coming from the private sector, we typically have an opportunity to do it less expensively than the public sector for a number of reasons, right? Do we see that there's a significant cost opportunity here for us to save money? Or is this pretty much about the same of what it cost if we hired all the same people?
Well, frankly, I haven't crunched those numbers.
Actually, I have.
I knew someone would have to do that.
I have.
Very would have.
I have. I would tell you that, you know, based on what I can glean out of there as an estimated hourly rate, okay, that there's on the average full-time employee, okay, there's about $3,200 in excess of what we would pay our employees now. Now, I would tell you that if the employee is not taking health insurance, then that's costing us more money. If the employee is taking health insurance, however, clearly there's a significant savings there. And as Mike said, these numbers are probably a little fat. Now, as far as the effectiveness of the job being done by these employees versus our employees, quite honestly, that's something you're not going to be able to measure until...
You can't measure that on paper.
You can't measure that on paper.
Right.
But I would tell you that, I mean, it is typically the reason you privatize.
Right.
Because you can save money.
And the hourly rate does bake in the benefits into the
Right.
private employees into
Right.
this, right? Which
Right.
you're not factoring when you're doing it, right?
So
Okay.
I always run those numbers. You know that, right?
We spent how much money on maintenance?
Why do
as a school
something if it's
district?
not going to?
How much
What was our
money do we
total
spend
amount
on
of money we
maintenance?
spent on a
Is
school
it the
district?
330?
No, it's more than,
Well, I'm thinking of that number you
You're
gave.
thinking custodial
No, I was-
maintenance or
no.
just maintenance?
No, when we gave Mike the initial figures,
Yeah.
right? And then we came back and said that those figures
Is that what I did?
included
Sure.
if the override passed. But the actual savings was somewhere in the $300,000 range. That's the number I remember. Remember,
Right,
initially,
right.
we were the 5, well, I don't know if that's the one I'm, yeah.
That was
Remember,
just, that was
okay.
initial costs.
Right, I think the number I remember seeing was 542. And
Yeah.
we were talking about 500 was the schools.
Right, and the
Right.
question, the
And then you sent something out saying, no, it wasn't 500 for the schools, it was closer to 300 to 350 for the schools.
because there would be, well, a couple of things that you have to take into account. And I will tell you that our discussion the other day was a better discussion, so there are more things in the most recent, proposal that we've seen than were included initially. But you still have, $25,000 to $30,000 worth of inspections. You still have the grounds supplies. You have whatever you need as far as equipment and equipment maintenance, okay? You have the paper and plastic, that's about $22,000 for the schools. You apparently don't have the cost for parts. I had written that down, I had misunderstood Mike. So apparently parts are included at least, to some degree.
And you're
As
saying
far
all
as
this
the
stuff is
mechanical-
currently in our budget?
These are all things we have to expend, but the other thing about this $500,000 that I gave Mike way back a long time ago,
Wait, did you just say that all these things are things we have to still pay
we
for?
would still have to account for.
Okay.
And let me finish off that
Your
list. The
question
final
was, how much
things.
do we
Yes.
spend?
Right.
That's why I'm
The
trying
final,
to back
okay,
up.
but
How much
that's,
you spend.
okay, but let me let me finish off this list, then let me come back to that, because it's all gonna tie together. Okay, you still have some contracted services, that you're going to need, okay? Now, the 500
Like-
versus 300.
Like what else?
Like the roof.
Well, for example, you've got, if you have to remove snow from a pitch roof, you're gonna have to contract that out, okay?
We're just gonna assume we have to do that.
If you have something that needs to be repaired that's under the capital improvement measure, but still needs to be repaired, there's gonna have to be some, and I'm thinking like, for
But that's not a
example,
contract.
well, no, like a door replacement.
Right, but I'm trying to figure out, like, we have other stuff, and I kind of have a
Not
list
like
of
the
that.
alarms.
Yeah.
That
The
goes.
alarms, that's, yes.
The alarm
The
goes with
alarm
Pembroke,
contract, you know, there's elevator repairs, okay?
which happen a lot,
Right.
right?
So, those things come into play there. The other thing is, this 500,000 is based on budget. We had $130,000 we spent that was unanticipated this year.
Right, that was the
Right, but
number I
we-
was trying to,
And we had a
yeah.
hard
Yeah.
freeze on the budget because of
Right,
it.
we had a hard freeze on
Right.
the budget. So you take that 130 off of this 500, if you will, now you're down to $370,000.
So 500 includes the
See what I'm-
130 of unanticipated?
So
Or
No, it
not.
does not. 500 was
So
just
we
the
spent-
budget.
So 500 is what we're gonna spend on our budget this year, like,
We spent 130, we're
Plus
right now
130.
anticipating we're gonna spend actually at 139 right now, I
so
think.
overall,
my
it would be
projection.
$640,000
Right.
about?
So that's where the numbers
But
get,
that's not necessarily every year.
Well,
Right, but
it's been the last 2 years.
pretty
Last
consistent.
couple of years it has been.
Yeah.
last year was 131, and this year right now it's at 139.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's all things like a Pearly fan, a middle high school
Right.
library air conditioner.
The
when
exhaust fans at the high school 2 years ago, that was $33,000.
When,
Heaters at Pembroke that went in the classrooms when they were
Yeah.
30
that's right.
degrees.
And like when we do our annual inspection before we can open the schools, and we had to replace the fire doors.
Right.
Things like that.
Now, again, some of the mechanical pieces of that are mitigated through the
With our
preventive
con-
maintenance.
Right.
With the ESCO.
Okay, and with the ESCO work. I did it.
That's not
But-
historically been a
but-
huge number
but-
for us.
But it's some of those other things that are a concern. Okay,
Right.
and it's some of those things that, like, again, we know we're gonna have, at some point in time, hopefully not this year, but at some point in time, that Pearly basement's gonna flood again unless we have a mitigation project there. Okay, so that's gonna be something that's gonna need to be dealt with. Right now, I don't see covered in here, and that would be a
Right, and
contracted
it has to
service.
be dealt with immediately.
Right,
Right, but one of the things is if all of a sudden you talk about freezing your budget and you need to freeze your budget to take care of something extraordinary, when you freeze, it affects all of your custodial maintenance and everything across the board. So if you have to freeze the budget per se, I'm just throwing this out as an
Yeah.
example. If you have to freeze the budget, you're still getting your custodial, you're still getting your preventative maintenance, you're still getting your grounds, you're still getting it all taken care of because this is in place. This is no longer on the table to be possibly affected by a freeze in your budget because it is already taken care of in another budgeting aspect.
What is the grounds? What exactly are we talking about when we say grounds?
you're talking about, and I always say fields and grounds very deliberately in that order.
But
You-
this doesn't say anything about fields. There's no
No,
fields.
well, when we talked about it,
Grounds
I,
include fields?
It's in,
it's,
yeah.
yeah, it's
Okay.
it's included there.
So grounds, what is that?
Okay, you're talking about
High school,
the high school and the
football field.
Pearly, well, high school football field and baseball field, the upper
There's a lot of
field.
fields.
The upper fields.
Okay, the Pearly field, okay.
GIA did that.
You have sprinklers in, I don't know about, yes, you have sprinklers in all of those fields, I believe. You have the field painting,
Wemo.
which is both the manpower to paint it, but it's also, I would say there's probably about $5,000 to $6,000 a year in field paint that has to be spent. You have seeding, which we have not done the way we should. You have aerating, which Carol spoke about earlier. We have an aerator, but it really isn't an aerator that's practical for the fields we have.
Right.
You have, because of the nature of the football field right now, and I know there's discussion about a turf field, but right now, with a natural field, depending on which, the part of the football field is farthest away from the parking lot, let me describe it that way. It gets flooded on a regular basis, so you have to bring in turfus or something else to do that. Because of the rains and wet weathers, you know, the fields get torn up, so like, for example, next week, we're gonna be spreading loam, that's about 800, well, actually, I take that back, I think Peter Durkee is getting us the loam. So I don't believe we are going to have to spend the $800 or so that it costs for the loam.